I was sitting outside just after sunrise, watching the mist loosen its grip on the yard, when the thought arrived without warning. I'm 80 years old. At this age, silence changes its meaning. It's no longer just the absence of sound. It's a room filled with memories that haven't spoken in years. I've lived long enough to see entire versions of the world disappear. Stories I once relied on. Traditions that made sense back then. But more than that, I've watched people vanish from the edges of my life until the edges moved inward. Parents first, then siblings. Friends who once knew my laugh without explanation. And the one person I believed would sit beside me until the very end. They're all gone now. When you reach this stage of life, you begin to feel translucent. The world belongs to the young, and you are something it looks through rather than at. You watch them rush past, stressed over things that now seem impossibly small. They ask questions like, "What's it like to be old?" Or worse, they don't ask at all. They just look at you with sympathy, as if surviving this long is some kind of misfortune. But here's what no one tells you about being 80. When nearly everything is taken away, what's left isn't emptiness. It's clarity. If you're younger than me, lean in. If you're my age, sit down. You already know how tired standing gets. I want to tell you about what stays. Not the things you can ensure. Not the things you can photograph. The things that remain when the house is quiet and no one needs you anymore. The first lesson took me decades to accept. We don't truly own anything. Not our homes. Not our titles. Not even the people we love most. In my 40s and 50s, I believed my life was the sum of what I'd built. My work. My reputation. The proof that I mattered. I protected those things like they were permanent. Now I look at my hands, and they're empty. And somehow, that feels honest. Every house I lived in belongs to someone else now. The career I poured myself into exists only in fading paperwork and half-forgotten stories. The awards didn't follow me into this morning. What stayed wasn't the achievement. It was the person I became while chasing it. And then there are the people. We spend our lives saying my wife, my child, my family, as if ownership were part of love. But the truth is gentler and harder than that. The people we love are borrowed. Every one of them. When you stop trying to hold people forever and start being fully present while they're here, grief changes shape. It doesn't disappear, nothing that deep ever does, but it softens. Loss stops feeling like theft and starts feeling like gratitude. What remains isn't their body or their voice. It's the love you gave, because love is the one thing time can't repossess. When you're young, you're always waiting. Waiting for the milestone, the promotion, the wedding, the trip that will finally make life feel complete. You live with your eyes fixed on the distance. It took me nearly 80 years to realize that life doesn't live on the peaks. It lives on the trail between them. If I could return to my younger self, I wouldn't chase more success. I'd chase more awareness. I'd sit longer with my coffee. I'd notice the way light hits the floor in the afternoon. I'd listen instead of preparing my reply. At the end of a long life, what you carry with you isn't the highlights. It's 1,000 small moments that didn't feel important at the time and turn out to be everything. One of the hardest adjustments has been solitude. My generation was taught to stay busy, to fill silence, to prove usefulness. But when the house emptied and the phone stopped ringing, I realized something uncomfortable. I hadn't spent much time with myself. Most people avoid their own company for decades. They drown it out with noise, work, responsibility, other people. But eventually, running becomes impossible. Your body slows, your world shrinks, and you're left alone with the one person you can't escape. At first, that's terrifying. Then, if you stay long enough, it becomes strength. What remains is the relationship you've built with yourself. If you never learned to be your own ally, old age feels like a prison. If you did, it feels like shelter. I learned to forgive the man I used to be, the mistakes, the arrogance, the fear disguised as certainty. What stayed was peace, quiet, earned peace, with the face in the mirror. People ask me about regrets. Of course I have them. Anyone who says otherwise is lying or hasn't lived. But here's the difference time teaches you. Regret is about what you didn't do. Remorse is about who you hurt. I regret the risks I avoided, the love I didn't express because pride stood in the way. But the heaviest weight is remembering moments when I chose being right over being kind. We argue as if victory matters. We guard our egos like they're fragile treasures. Yet as the names in your contact list slowly disappear, you realize something brutal and beautiful. Being right is a very lonely achievement. Kindness was almost always the better answer. If there's someone you can call today, call them. Not to reopen old battles, not to prove a point, just to say, I'm glad you exist. One day they won't, and the argument won't matter at all. There's a strange grace in watching the world continue without you. I see teenagers glued to their screens, speaking a language I barely understand, moving with an urgency that once belonged to me. At first, it stung. It felt like being left behind. Then I understood. That's how it's supposed to work. What remains for me now is the role of witness. I see my grandson smile, and in it I recognize my father's eyes. I see generations overlapping, each carrying pieces of the last. I'm not meant to lead anymore. I'm meant to watch and cheer and know that I was part of something much larger than myself. There is incredible freedom in no longer needing to be important. What remains is gratitude, not the polite kind, the fierce, aching kind. Gratitude for having been here at all, for loving deeply, even when it ended in loss, for witnessing over 29,000 sunrises. I'm 80 years old, and I'm no longer afraid of darkness. Because I've learned something simple and true. The light never disappears. It just moves on. If you're hearing this, don't wait decades to discover what remains. Look now. It's in your breath. It's in the person across from you. It's in the quiet place inside your chest. Thank you for sitting here with me for a moment. If these words touched you, share them with someone you care about. And if you feel like it, leave a comment. Tell me one thing life has taught you to treasure. I read every one. It helps the house feel a little less empty.